welcome you all to Something to Talk About, which is a regular program here at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are grateful for the sponsorship of this program by Fieldstone Memory Care of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone is offering innovative and compassionate care, and they are accepting residents right now. If you would like to have a tour of their beautiful facilities on Rolling Bay, jot this number down, 360-271-2530. And welcome to Ann Lovejoy and to Barbara Lawrence for today's Inclusion Study Group discussion of canoe journeys.
Oh, thanks, Reed. And Barbara, we are so grateful and happy to have you give us another one of your wonderful history overviews. A lot of us have heard about the canoe journey and some of us have seen bits of it, but it's an amazing story and I'd love to hear you give us a fuller view.
Great. So I was trying to have a PowerPoint presentation with images and documents and a timeline, but I'm going to have to just come back another time and do that. The copier that we have that does images wasn't going to copy. All the things I have are from magazines and they're or tabloids, and they're bigger than it wanted. So I've got great photos right here that you can't see, great photos and articles that you can't see, but I'm gonna just have to have my sparkling personality in hopes that engages you enough to want to come back and see those another time when I can get them all scanned in and presented in a PowerPoint for you. So what I can say is I was born in 1958 and raised here on the reservation and in Suquamish. And while I was aware of my tribe and elections and you know, who was our chairman and what was going on, you know, basically before I was 18, it was when I turned 18, when you're allowed to vote in the tribe, is when I like got in and was in the meetings and present in the meetings. Prior to that, I was the first time I protested, and this all plays into canoe journeys. The first time I protested anything, I was 11 years old, and I went with my cousin Peg Deem and my sister Marilyn to what was then called Fort Lawton, and where a whole bunch of natives, hundreds of natives, and then some celebrities like Jane Fonda and Dick Gregory, and I'm not going to remember who else, were there to support us in the takeover of Fort Lawton. What you might not know is when there's federal land that was ceded by a tribe that's still in federal hands, like Fort Lawton, when the federal government decides to not use that land anymore, they must offer it to the ceded tribe, the tribe that ceded it. And they didn't do that. They just got ready to make it a park, make Fort Lawton a park, and whatever else, sell some of it to developers, what have you. And so the tribes that were party to that treaty and had previous villages in the Seattle area, including Suquamish, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, Tulalip, these tribes showed up with the urban Indian population, which there was many urban Indians in Seattle, to take space and say, we need this, you know, we need this for our purposes. So I actually climbed a chain link fence and you know, sang with drummers and you know, ate whatever food there was to eat. And, you know, it was pretty exciting. I wasn't there for the whole time, but I was there for a few days, and it was like eye-opening to listen to all the speakers about treaty rights and federal responsibility and all that. Now, so that brings me to, in my teen years, there were reasons to protest and be active for not just natives, but for other populations that needed our attention too. I remember protesting the wrath of grapes when Safeway wasn't, or whoever, but it was mostly against Safeway, who wasn't paying the farm workers what they decided, or protecting them for, and I wasn't 18 yet. So activism, paying attention to unjust treatment of people, especially people of color and low-income people, was like in front of me. When I was 19, 20. When I was 20, I was working for the Suquamish tribe as a oral history, in an oral history program, interviewing elders. And when I look back, it would be something that I would pay tuition for, to go listen to the elders in the tribe, the oldest people we had, who were, so this is like, I turned 18 in 1976. So the late 70s and the early 80s, when there was a fully funded program, there was 10 of us with tape recorders and microphones going to elders' houses and tape recording their life stories. And every single one whose house I went into, they say, "Oh, my life wasn't interesting. Oh, I don't have that many memories. Oh," and we were prepared for this. And so they said, look around and see if there's some photographs on the wall, you know, especially family, which if you've ever been in a native house, there's always that. And so who's in this photo? What were you guys doing? Is that a basket down there? Is that a canoe paddle? And get them to start talking. And all of a sudden it's open and they just start saying everything. So then we kind of paused the oral history program and started the photo archives program, where we collected photos from the elders, copied them, made multiple copies. We had a dark room built in the attic of the tribal center, and hired a photographer. I mean, the kind that actually does the copying of the photos. And then we had what we called working prints, and then we went out with tablets, and would take, you know, a couple dozen photos. We'd try to take ones with people that we knew were in their family or were in that part of the reservation or that village. If they were from another village not on the reservation, we'd take photos from that village, get them to talk. And so then we had the photo archives project and the oral history project, helping each other to grow. That was all before the museum existed. The museum opened on June 1st in 1983. And so I was working for the Suquamish Tribal Cultural Programs before there was a museum. Then when there was a museum, I was, you know, from the first day, I was the senior tour guide. And so teaching the other ones how to be tour guides. I mean, we helped this same oral history and photo archives people. We helped put the museum together, put the exhibit together. Our first exhibit was called The Eyes of Chief Seattle, and we looked from the treaty forward. And our biggest part of that exhibit was about the boarding schools. And my dad had gone to a boarding school, like I had told you before, so that part was particularly interesting to me. Now, one of my jobs, because, you know, we didn't have back-to-back tours back then, and we were open 7 days a week, and I chose to work weekends. My 5 days included the weekend days because there was only five tour guides. And so not everybody wanted to work weekends. Well, I didn't care about Friday and Saturday night, and I didn't, go to church on Sunday. So I said, I'll work the weekends. And so to fill in the time, they gave me another job, which was to go through, 5 different newspapers every day and look for every article that had anything to do with the Suquamish tribe or any other tribe around here, or tribes at all, and cut those out and put them in the archives. So you read the whole paper, if you're somebody like me, you read the whole paper looking for any little thing that might be mentioned anywhere. And I started seeing these notices about, this garden club was having a meeting that included people from Olympia to talk about their future plans for the state's 100th birthday. And the Rotary was having somebody from Olympia to talk about the upcoming state's 100th birthday. Some of these times I was reading these, I was reading these newspapers every single day. And so I was a wannabe radical militant, and I'm reading these articles, and I would say to a coworker, the state's going to turn 100 years old. We have baskets older than that. Are they going to act like an adult now and work with us, government to government, like they're supposed to? And so my boss, my director, and then the person right under the director, they were both really nice non-Indian ladies who both had bachelor's degrees. And and they were writing grants like crazy to keep us working. And and they had heard me spouting off about, so the state's going to be 100 years old, so what, try 30,000 years, and there wasn't a whole lot of affection between the tribes and the states back then. And so my boss heard me say that, and she said, okay, Ms. Lawrence, I want you to go to some of those meetings. If they're open to the public, I want you to go to some of those meetings and report back to me, take notes and report back to me. So I started showing up at them. I had nothing to do with garden parties or rotaries or whatever. And I kept going to them, and I'd sit in the back of the room. And whenever they said, does anybody have any questions? I'd say, what about the tribes? So the state's going to be 100 years old. So what? What about the tribes? You're having a birthday, you're having 100-year-old birthday. We've been here for thousands of years. What about the tribes? And I kept going to these meetings, kept saying that. They really didn't have an answer. And I was just, like I said, I was young and I want to be radical militant. Well, one day I was working in the front desk of the museum during a weekday with the curator, who was Charlie Saigo. And my dad and his dad were really close friends when they were alive, and they both died young. The phone rings and I answer it, and this very, very eloquent voice, very New England voice, says that he's looking for Barbara Lawrence. I never heard my name said like that. And I couldn't tell where the A stopped and the R started. You know what I mean? And then throw in a W. They all just kind of were in there together. And it was an accent. I had toured lots of people from lots of countries, and I hadn't heard that accent yet. And I said, that's me. And this person said, well, my name is Putnam Barber, and I'm the executive assistant to the Secretary of State, and we are planning the state's 100th birthday, and your attendance at these neighborhood meetings has been noticed. And I went, oh no, I'm in trouble now. They want to talk to my boss. And he said, we're looking for a Native representative, and your name keeps coming up. And I said, really? He said, yes, would you please send us a resume? And then we'll do our due diligence and we'll get back to you. And so I said, sure. And I hung up the phone and I said, I told Charlie what was asked of me. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, what's a resume? Now, back then, so when I was in school, I was highly capable. North Kitsap doesn't have a great reputation for accepting cultural diversity, is I guess the nicest way to say it, especially back then. And so one day I just got up out of class when I was a junior, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I just got up and walked out during class, got in my car, which I owned because I had a job, and I drove to Bremerton to Olympic College, and I walked in and said I wanted to take a GED test. And so I did. Passed everything except math and science were a little low, but it still passed. And then I was done. I was done, you know. So I didn't know what a resume was. Charlie showed me his resume and he said, so we're going to have to just skip the part about your education and just put in all the stuff you've done professionally, which was a lot actually in that short amount of time. The oral history project, the photo archives project, a basketry symposium that I planned and carried out by myself, and just several things, senior tour guide. So I hadn't been to college yet. So I put the resume together and sent it to Olympia. And then yet another phone call from Putnam Barber, who asked me to come down to a meeting in Olympia. So I did. This reminds me of the Mary Tyler Moore part when she was applying for the job, and she like kept pulling her skirt down to hide the run in her nylons. My skirt was held together with a couple safety pins, and you know, it was things like that. You know, the best clothes that I had looked really nice, but there was safety pins, you know. And so so I went to the meeting. Now, I didn't know they had already selected me. I thought I'd, you know, meet a bunch of candidates, and but no, they had already selected me. They'd already looked at my background and they already selected me. And so I come into I had never been inside the Capitol building, and it's a lot of marble. It's a lot of big fancy chairs and a big table in the Secretary of State's office. And I go in and I sit against the wall in a chair, and Putnam Barber comes over and he reaches down and, you know, lifts me up, you know, brings me over to the table and says, you're here, you're a commissioner, you're gonna sit here. Well, so back then there was 10 commissioners, and most of them had silver hair, were retired from somewhere fancy like Boeing, Weyerhaeuser. Some of them were elected officials. And it was, I was nervous. I had been in front of tribal council lots of times, and school boards a few times, presenting cultural information, but I had never been to this kind of meeting. And then we get down to business. I get introduced and all the people are introduced, and then they start talking about, you know, a logo and a theme for the state's 100th birthday, and you know, just some basic things. The logo, so they had already been having meetings for I don't know how long. And so when I was there was an artist who was presenting this, you know, those little handheld little wheelie gigs that you blow on it and it goes around and around, and it's pretty colors and all that. Well, a graphic image of that, something like that. It was that, but it was stylized, was the first logo that we selected. And then they started talking about the major themes. One of the ideas was hot air balloons festival. and I didn't get it. I just didn't understand the connection. Another idea was a reenactment of the Discovery ship coming into Restoration Point, the Chief Kitsap's village on Bainbridge. There was a couple other ideas, and then there was, you know, of course, we had the Eastern Washington and Western Washington rivalry thing going on, and had to figure out how we were gonna, like, you know, spread out the activities and festivities. It lasted for about 3 hours, and then people were going home. I went to a couple more meetings like that with topics similar to that, and artists, different artists from Eastern Washington and Western Washington presenting their possible installations for that celebration, and of course looking for money. And then there was counties and cities looking for when is the state gonna hand out monies for counties and cities to do, you know, some kind of celebration when the time comes. So this was 1985 when I was participating in this. So I'm in my early 20s, been working at the museum for a while, and I was reporting back to tribal council. I truly thought I was representing the Suquamish tribe or tribal museums, which there was 3 in the whole state. After the 3rd meeting, the co-chairs, so it was Governor Gardner and Jean Gardner, his first lady, but it was the previous governor that appointed me. And then Governor Gardner retained me. And then this 3rd meeting happened, and Ralph and Jean asked if I would stay after. Again, I thought I was in trouble, you know, and so everybody left, and that was just those 2. And they said, "You're doing such a great job." Now, I love these 2 people, and Ralph Monroe, of course, is from Bainbridge and has close ties to the Suquamish tribe. But I was just getting to know him. "You're doing such a great job representing all the tribes in the state." And right then I gulped. Oh my God, you know, all the tribes in the state, that was news to me. And I knew I was gonna have to go home and tell the tribal council, because in our way, there's something that you do. You don't just represent other tribes, you just don't. And so they said, "You're doing such a great job representing all the tribes in the state. We're wondering if you could represent some other populations too." And I said, what do you have in mind? And they said, "Women, if you could represent women of the state of Washington, and all the other people of color, and immigrants." And I'm thinking, now I'm like 25 years old, and I'm thinking, well, who's left? If I'm representing all the tribes in the state, all the women of the state, all the other people of color of the state, and immigrants, who's left? Like, the other 9 people are going to represent white men, you know? I mean, I didn't say it like that, but what I did say, and I'm a researcher, and researchers base their information on research, and you take your time, you research, you look, you study, you thoroughly get all this information, and then you put together a presentation. We're not like quick like that, you know, we're not quick. And so so I'm sitting there, and I knew that I had to be composed, and I knew the answer was not only no, but hell no. But I knew I had to maintain a professional relationship. So when I finally felt that I could do that, I opened my mouth, and I swear it was all the elders, all my ancestors speaking through me. And I said, "No, no, no." And they were like surprised. And I pointed at the table, and I said, "This is a big table, and I see a whole bunch more chairs in the other room that you could pull in here." I said, "All those people need their own representation. All of them need their own. no, I can't, and no, I won't. It's bigger than I thought, representing all the tribes. But no, and you can make a bigger committee, you can make a bigger commission and get all the right people to represent all those communities. And they looked at each other and they said, you're right. So we went from 10 people to 25 people on the commission, and all those different communities were well represented by different people. When I went back to the tribal council met at nights back then because they weren't paid positions, and the chair, all those guys, all those people had jobs, and so the meetings were at night. So I came back and went to the next night meeting of tribal council, and I told them that it was news to me that I was representing all the tribes in the state. And we all like had this collective gasp, because in the tribal way, like it's okay for another community like that to pick me if I was representing tribal museums. And if I was representing the Suquamish tribe, I already checked it out with tribal council. They were letting me use a tribal vehicle and tribal gas to get to these meetings and back. And but to represent other tribes, it's not done. Some tribes don't have women representatives, and few tribes have young people represent them. Now we're talking, you know, back in 1985. So, so we knew instantly what we had to do. We had to put together a mailing that went to all the tribes that said, this is the state of Washington is getting ready to celebrate their 100th birthday. Yeah, we think that too. They have selected one of our members to represent all the tribes. She works for our museum. She was raised in a cultural way, and we're asking if you will give her an audience. And then they sent all these letters out to all the tribes in the state. And then I started making appointments with their cultural department or their tribal council, whoever they would allow me to meet with. And I had to cluster up these meetings as fast as possible, and on the west side of the state and on the east side of the state. And then the tribe rented me a car and gave me some money and a credit card, and off I went, you know. And I mean, it was like 3 different trips. On the west side, it was go up north to all these different tribes, then down south to all these different tribes, and then cross the mountains and go to all those different tribes. It was 3 different trips. Picked the wrong time of the year to go to Eastern Washington because it was snowing. We ended up in a whiteout, and I hadn't ever put chains on a car before. There was just all kinds of things that happened. Stayed longer because of snow, and I had 3 little kids at home, and so my mom and their dad were taking care of them, and I was calling home from payphones back in, you know, where there used to be payphones, and every single tribe accepted me, every single tribe. So when I was there in person, I brought gifts to their tribal council or their cultural committee, whichever they would have me meet with. And then I would say, you know, this is what's happening. The state's birthday is in 1989. So we have some time, but we want you to think of what is your, what do you want to have happen for the state's birthday? Almost all the tribes, I mean, they didn't all answer at once. They all, you know, talked amongst themselves and got back to us, but the tribes on the east side said that they thought it was a good idea if there was a book about all the tribes, and if there was a documentary about the tribes. The tribes on the west side were saying, well, we'd like an exhibit, and there could be a book that goes with the exhibit, and maybe some kind of short film, educational film for the students, you know, like something that would go into classrooms. And so those were the messages I brought back to the Centennial Commission and to my tribal council. And as time went by, the 25 people on the Centennial Commission started being assigned to subcommittees, and there was several subcommittees. It was decided there was going to be a tribal exhibit that each tribe would participate and put in the exhibit what they wanted in the exhibit. And then, of course, the 3 tribal museums, which at that time were the Suquamish Museum, the Yakima Museum, and the Makah Museum. All 3 of us were hoping that that exhibit would be at one of the tribal exhibits. It wasn't to be. The size and scale of the exhibit was going to be so big that really the only place for it was the Burke Museum, which ultimately worked out really, really well. It was a fantastic exhibit. It was called A Time of Gathering, and there is an exhibit catalog that goes with it, and it was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal. There were arguments about what should and should not be in the exhibit. Many tribal people didn't want there to be anything spiritual. And the Burke wanted something spiritual. They wanted a sweat lodge, or they wanted a smokehouse, or they wanted something. They wanted some kind of, and so all of these, and it was easy for the tribes that didn't want to say, it's not going to be in our exhibit, it's not going to be in our part. But then they were able to find a willing person to make a sweat lodge. And there were so many of us that were so upset about that. And I still to this day think that they never should have done that. They just shouldn't have done that. They found a way to, what do they say now, accommodate those of us who weren't happy about it. They put was it a big black curtain or some kind of barrier with just little tiny peekholes, so you couldn't like walk up to the sweat lodge, you could just peek in, which I thought was actually pretty cool, but still I think it never should have been there. That's that part of me that's radical militant. There's something that we need to keep for ourselves. There were meetings on the commission decided to have half the meetings on the west side of the state, half the meetings on the east side of the state, but we were individually responsible for getting ourselves there. And I was a low income, you know, mom of 3 kids. My job was minimum wage. Now the tribe would give me a tribal vehicle and pay for me to go to Olympia and back. And they paid for me to go meet every single tribe and carry that message. But they couldn't fly me every other month to the east side. So so I made it to a few of those, and then I wasn't able to. Now we're talking about some time frame has gone by. So that was 85 and the celebration was in 89. I decided to go to college, and I applied to all the state colleges and a couple of private ones. I was accepted everywhere, but the best scholarship was at the Evergreen State College in Olympia. And I didn't choose it because it was Olympia, and it was so, you know, so easy for the Centennial Commission. That's not the reason. It was the best scholarship. They have a cultural diversity scholarship, which is all the tuition. They did back then anyway. And so I went there. It was a great choice for me and my children. And then at a certain point, the commission decided, well, it was good for me to be on the commission while I was working for the museum, but now that I'm a full-time college student and a mom of 3 little kids, they thought they didn't want to add the pressure of me being on the commission while I was a full-time college student. So it was, how do I say this? they invited me to relinquish my seat. And but they said, before you do, we want you to succeed in college. We want to help you do that. So maybe you'll stay on some of these committees. That, like I said, there was 25 people now, and there was all kinds of committees which all had some amazing possibilities happening. So I said I wanted to be on anything that had to do with the exhibit or anything tribal whatsoever. And then they said, help us, you know, find somebody else. And I said, well, you got Billy Frank right here. You know, you have Billy Frank right here in this Nisqually. He couldn't be any closer. And if you got him, you got everybody, you know. And so Billy Frank was the next person. And so I stayed for a couple meetings and helped Billy Frank to know what was going on. Now, I didn't need to help him go to meetings because he'd been doing that for years, you know. But I needed to help him know what this was all about, who was who in the zoo, and what were these plans, and who, you know, what were these ideas, and what had this tribal support, and what were some of the tribes upset about, and what about the unrecognized tribes and things like that. So, you know, it's not always easy, all this stuff. There's lots and lots and lots of interests. You know, you might know, or you might not know, there's more tribes than there are reservations. So most reservations have more than one tribe on them. So it's not just 29 reservations, it's all the tribes. So, and then let's not forget the urban Indians, you know, let's not forget the urban Indians. So that's all part of the state's history. One of the committees was called Lasting Legacy. One of the committees was the Maritime Committee. I forgot something. Way back in the beginning, before there was a Centennial Commission, but they were looking forward to the birthday, for the 100th birthday. There was a front page article about the Queen of England going to New Zealand for her, I don't know what they're called, you know, 20th year, 50th year, you know, jubilee of some kind, and that all the Maoris were protested the event for the Queen, and so Ralph Monroe brought that newspaper with that front page article to the then governor, who was the one that preceded Governor Gardner, which I'm not going to remember that guy's name because I really didn't meet him, and it was only a couple meetings for him before it turned over, and it was Ralph and Jean Gardner, who I love, by the way. Jean Gardner was amazing. So he said, if we don't include the natives from the beginning in this 100-year birthday celebration, we're going to have this happen. And so that's how there became a native seat on the Centennial Commission. Billy Frank stayed with it to the end. I was on the subcommittees, and I was not on the Maritime Committee, but I ended up there because their idea, and it was in one of those early meetings when I stayed after and said, because, you know, some things I could say in front of the group, you know, I could vote on something, but I had a real hard time wondering who's Republican, who's Democrat, who cares about tribes and who doesn't. What do they know that I don't? And like I said, I felt like I was the, you know, kid from junior high while all of these were collegians, you know, because like the first 10 people, I was younger than all of the rest of them by decades. And, you know, there was times where I felt like I was token, but I wouldn't be a token but I felt like maybe I was selected like one, you know, especially because I'm light skinned. You know, it always makes me wonder. People like me because I'm not too dark, you know. So those were some things I thought. So I stayed after on my own to talk to Ralph and to Ralph Monroe and Jean Gardner and tell them that if they were going to do a reenactment of the Discovery ship, it wasn't our best day in our history, you know. Before the white people arrived, the diseases arrived. You know what I mean? You know how that happens? Pandemics and epidemics and all that, they spread faster than the actual travelers. I don't know if you understand that, but so the disease got here before the ship, right? You know, I mean, we're going through a pandemic, so we should understand that. So so we were already suffering by the time we saw our first non-Indians, and then we suffered more. And so and there was a few Discovery ships that came by and you know, did what they did. One of them, because I don't know if you know this about pre-contact, we would wrap our deceased in blankets and put him in a canoe, crack the canoe so the canoe is not useful in this world but useful in the spirit world, and then put him up in a tree, and then wait a year and then come back and get them down because the remains would be smaller. We'd put them in a bentwood box, put them in the ground, burn the seed, burn the canoe and any of their possessions so that they would go to them in the spirit world. And then during that year, because it takes that long to travel on the river to the spirit world, we don't call for them, we don't mourn for them, we don't cry for them, we just wait. And then after that year has passed, then we do a ceremony, and then we can use their name again. Then we can name somebody after them, then we can talk about them freely, then we can cry because if we did everything right, they're in the spirit world now, they got there. Instead of if we were crying and calling for them, they could see and hear us, even if we couldn't see and hear them. And so they would stay back from their journey to try to take care of us. So that's why we don't do that. That's why we don't say their name for a year. So so one of these Discovery ships, you know, they were looking through their, I don't know if it was like a spyglass or whatever you call them, and they noticed something in a tree, and they went and got it and took it home with them. And you know, I don't think it was the first ship, I think it was the second one. We just got those human remains back a couple years ago, and reburied them in our cemetery. And we only got them back because of the NAGPRA. And even though NAGPRA doesn't, you know, it's a federal law, but it was NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So I had already been representing the Squamish Museum at museum conferences and historical conferences, you know, education conferences and all that. And it was known to us that something like 10,000 native skulls were in the Smithsonian, just in the Smithsonian. And why? They said for comparative value, for comparative research, but not black skulls and white skulls and Filipino skulls and Japanese, just natives, just natives. Why? 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 They also would have the grave goods, weird term, grave goods, but we would bury people with all the things that they need to travel, you know, to travel to the spirit world. And then we'd revisit the grave and bring them their favorite things. And then non-Indians would take them and, you know, separate the head from the body, and I don't know what they did with the body, but they kept the skulls, and then they would have all the grave goods, necklaces, you know, outfits, you know, whatever we put there, you know, anything we put there, and then there'd be a necklace collection, then there'd be, you know, weapons collection, there'd be canoe paddle connections, there'd be whatever, but they were all separated. They didn't keep them all together, right? And so, so the same time that the state is planning their birthday, all these other groups are planning, what about this? You know, natives at every conference we were going to, whether it was tribal councils or whether it was archivists or whether it was, you know, any museum professionals, any tribal groups, educators, we were all wanting this law change, not a state law, because you may not have known that it is a felony for anybody to disturb a grave, unless it's an Indian grave. Then it's a misdemeanor, but not really a misdemeanor, because if you were an avocationist, it's okay. It's you get a pass. So at a conference, I said, what is an avocationist? Like there's this big museum professionals conference and all these natives, and there was this panel discussion, and they kept saying, archaeologists and avocationists, you know, they can do what they need to do with human remains. And I was like, what's an avocationist? And so I got up to the microphone, and there's, you know, there's a few hundred of us. And I said, what's an avocationist? And the presenter, who was a museum professional, a national known museum professional, said, well, you know, they're like Boy Scout leaders and retired dentists and retired doctors, you know, that they're intelligent people who just want to go collect, you know, artifacts. So it's not, we shouldn't punish them for doing this. And I'm like, what? That's bullshit. Now, I said that on the microphone. And then another panelist said, I agree with her, you know, and then they started in on each other about why you want retired professionals to be able to go out and do that, and why you want Boy Scout leaders to take Boy Scouts out to do that. And we're all these Indians are like going, no, no, we don't even want archaeologists doing it. You know, we don't even want that happening. And a young Native woman came over to me and said, my grandma wants to talk to you. So I went over there and I knelt down in front of her, and she said, I believe in what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but don't ever cuss it at a conference. Don't ever cuss at a microphone. Don't ever do that again, because they'll stop listening to you. So I got back in line at the microphone and I apologized for cussing, but I said, an elder just corrected me and said I shouldn't have cussed. But use every word in your imagination and put all the power behind it. That's not okay. It's not okay. And so at the same time that the Centennial Commission is going along planning this birthday, this other line of natives and museum professionals and legislatures are all working on this. And what came to pass in 1989, in the same year as the Centennial Commission, was the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So going forward, all graves are a felony. And avocationists don't have a free pass, and Boy Scout leaders don't have a free pass. And any owner of any property that happens upon remains or a shell midden or anything that indicates that a village was there or a campsite was there, they have the financial responsibility to protect that site, meaning they can't just bulldoze it and make a basement, you know? So so that was happening, and that came to pass. In the Maritime Committee, there was they were moving forward with some kind of reenactment. And a lot of us were like, oh, can it be something else? Can we be creative with it? Can you go ahead and bring the replica ship to Seattle or wherever? But could you let the canoes, can you let the tribes not have to go out there? I said, first, that came to a Suquamish village, and there were Suquamish canoes going around that ship. Several canoes full of Suquamish people singing songs and welcoming them to our territory, and then bringing gifts on board, and then the interaction. I said, we ain't got no canoe. It became illegal for us to carve canoes, to do anything cultural. It became illegal. The only place I knew where there was a whole bunch of canoes was at Ivor's Salmon House by the Burke Museum, where we had a meeting in there. And I walked in and I looked up, and there was dozens of canoes hanging from the ceiling. And I was wondering, how many of those belong to us? How'd he get them? Where were they? What happened? You know, as I was growing up, there was my dad's canoe paddle was above the fireplace, and that's all, a paddle. We treasure paddles. But so what came to pass was there was going to be, I think it's called the Lady Washington or whatever, was parked in Seattle. And I know that's not the right word, but it was over there. And we decided to have a paddle to Seattle. And the place to launch was Suquamish. So we put out the word. Oh, and so in saying this to the commission, we need access to old growth trees. We need to be able to pick them out ourselves, and we need to have some funds to hire carvers, because Suquamish doesn't have a canoe carver. We're going to have to get one from somewhere. We're going to have to pay for one to come teach our people how to do that. And then we're going to need paddles. And then, you know, we need at least this. So Ralph Monroe, again, the amazing Ralph Monroe, worked with the state's forest and state's forest and the National Guard, and then with the tribes to get the people from the tribes who are going to pick out the trees to go and pick out the trees, and then big enough, old enough, the right size, the right shape, all that, and then have them, and the National Guard delivered them to each of the tribes that were participating. So there was 12 trees, I believe, brought to 12 different tribes. And I am right now inside the Suquamish Original Tribal Center that's down on Sandy Hook Road, that I can look across and see Bainbridge Island. I'm looking at the water right now. And when I say that because several years ago, the entire tribal government moved out of this building and up closer into Suquamish. And so now I remember that day when we had all our families out here in the parking lot and watched the National Guard drive that giant tree down, this old growth tree down here. And then in enough time to carve for the paddle to Seattle. And then it wasn't done. We had to split it in half, so it could be 2 canoes, but just try to get one done, and we didn't get it finished. So so when it came time for paddle to Seattle, we took a canoe out of the museum and borrowed a canoe from a gentleman in Seattle who's a shop teacher, who him and his class made a canoe and let us borrow it for that and for a few years after that. Well, on this specific day, there was going to be the paddle to Seattle. So the night before, and working with the state parks, Ralph got permission for the canoes and the people who belong to their canoes to stay overnight at the Chief Seattle Park, because it was a state park. And I remember being there when the canoes started arriving, and when we started giving them gifts and giving them packets of information on where's the shower and where's, you know, where's the store and where, you know, all this stuff, and everything they needed to know. And then we had shuttles for them for wherever they needed to go and do, and, you know, take care of them overnight. And so nobody had ever stayed the night at the state park. And Chief Seattle Park is the site of the Desukwa village, which is where my family comes from. And so to see canoes on that beach, to see canoes land on that beach, to see canoes stay on that beach, to see people, native people sleeping there on our village site for the first time in, you know, since the treaty, was amazing. So the next day, bright and early, we're all, you know, in Suquamish, the metropolis, the thriving metropolis of Suquamish, you know, and the slab, you know, and we've got, you know, a stage, and we've got a microphone and speakers and all that, and we're, you know, talking on, okay, everybody over here, you know, we're gonna lower the canoes down on this boat ramp. And you know, there were speeches, the governor, the governor's wife, chairman of the tribe, I think was Benny Armstrong at the time. Great, he has a great personality, and oh, everything was happening. And there were so many people, natives from everywhere, and non-Indians too. And then all of a sudden, and each tribe is being introduced. And then that person from that tribe, that leader, whether it's the cultural leader or the tribal leader, was speaking. Now only the western part of the state had canoes. They had some kind of river canoes over there, but not serious, you know. So it was a really big deal. And all of a sudden, somebody started singing in a language we didn't know and started dancing through the crowd and came to the middle of the slab, middle of the dance floor. And here's these natives, and we're all like, who are they? Who are they? Where are they from? You know, and then when they got done singing a song, dancing in and singing a song, kind of interrupting, but it was like amazing. When they got to the microphone, this man's name was Frank Brown. And he was from Bella Bella, British Columbia, 600 miles north. And that he heard about us, heard about this canoe revival. And so he and his crew paddled down that 600 miles on their own to join us for this like 6-mile paddle across the water from Suquamish to Seattle, and to Golden Garden Park, I think. And then he told his story about when he was younger. Now, you know, this is 89, so he was, I would say he was maybe 30, but when he was somewhat younger, he had gotten in trouble. Him and a couple buddies had gotten in trouble, and their tribe banished them to an island because they live on a group of islands. So they banished them to this one little tiny island. And they said, you're going to be out here until we bring you back. While you're out here, you're going to, and each of them had to be in their own spot. They couldn't like be a group, the 3 boys, 3 young men. And you're going to have to think about what you want your life path to be from here forward. It's on you. And so this Frank Brown, he decided, you know, he was just gonna use it like a spirit quest and see what he was supposed to do, because he had no idea. But he was from a good family, but he had gone a wrong path and did some bad things, and so he was out there. And so he was out there long enough to figure out that his mission was going to be carving canoes and then teaching that to the young people of his tribe. And so he started doing that, and finished a canoe, and then got brought back to the village, and he said, this is going to be my life's work, this, and I'm going to, you know, because when you're carving a canoe, you have to be clean and sober. You have to be free of, you can't be beating your wife. You can't be, you know, stealing cars. You have to be present to the spiritual mission that you're on, which is creating a vessel that's going to carry humans. And it has to be serious. And so he did that, and they let him come back to the village. And then I don't know how many canoes he's created, but now he's an elder. And I mean, in 1989, he was, you know, I would say 30-ish, and he brought this group of young people down to join us. 600 miles, one canoe, stopping wherever they had to stop, you know, having beans and hot dogs. Maybe a tribe would take him in, you know, maybe, I don't know how that went, but he arrived, and then he said, and in 4 years forward, I challenge all of you Canoe nations to come visit us in Bella Bella. And so, so the first canoe journey in known history, since we weren't allowed to carve anymore, was from Suquamish to Golden Gardens. Once over there, all the other tribes who weren't in the canoes were waiting over there. And then we had a great celebration and more speeches and all that. And to be on the water, to watch canoes launch from the Suquamish beach was as emotional as watching them land and sleep there. And then to land over there. Now, I wasn't in a canoe. I drove a van full of kids over, and walked around as there was 13 canoes on the beach. So there's 12 that were carved or borrowed for the paddle to Seattle. And then there was the 13th one was the Frank Brown's canoe from Bella Bella. And his challenge to us for 4 years in the future, so that would be 1993, that arrived, that came. And here in Suquamish, by that time, we had a canoe carved, and we had all these meetings. You know, self-determination is a big word, and it has a big meaning behind it. And it was President Nixon that passed the Self-Determination Act for the tribes in the United States. And that was in his time in 1973, I believe. Now this is 1989. And we were still trying to have self-determination. We were still trying to say something and be heard, you know. Like I said, nowadays, if somebody wanted to have an exhibit that included natives, and most of the natives said we would prefer that you not have a sweat lodge, they probably wouldn't have a sweat lodge. They probably wouldn't keep going and find a willing native to make a sweat lodge. So what I'm getting at is here in Suquamish, where we didn't have a tribal member as an executive director, where we didn't have one department head as a tribal member or even as a native. And so we were still being led by white people. And then we're planning to go to Bella Bella. We're planning this trip, and this committee formed of these employees dominated by non-Indians. And they decide right away there shouldn't be anybody in the canoe that isn't 18 years old or older. We wanted youth in the canoe. We wanted tribal members in the canoe. We wanted youth in the canoe. There was going to be one van and 2 employees that were going to be the ground crew, that they would haul the tents and the food and the credit card and whatever, and meet them at every stop. We didn't know what every stop was going to be. We didn't know. But we fought for there was a tribal council, there was an elders council, and there was a youth council. The youth council was brand new, and I had 2 of my 3 kids were on that youth council. And And the youth council was pretty determined to have youth in the canoe. And as time went on, it was like, who was clean and sober, who was able to go, who was physically fit, who could get their paperwork in order, you know, who was representing the tribe well. And my son Nigel was 14 years old, and he was the only youth in the canoe, the only youth, the only Suquamish tribal member youth in the canoe. And then there had to be an adult that said, I take custody of him. And that was Tom Curley, who's our GIS, Geographic Information Systems guy. And so I had to sign a bunch of papers for Tom to make every decision in Nigel's benefit on the way up there and on the way back, and wave goodbye to them. So there was more employees than tribal members. There are tribal members who are employees, but there was more non-Indian employees than tribal members. And there was tribal members, but not many. And there was one tribal youth, and that was Nigel. He said that sometimes they would just pull the canoe over where there was a wide spot on the beach, you know, without any permission ahead of time. And it was hot dogs and beans or whatever. Sometimes the van with the tents and sleeping bags would find them, and sometimes it wouldn't, you know. Sometimes they had a fire and that's it, you know. And when the canoes got to Bella Bella, I think there was like 23 canoes at Bella Bella that year. And then once they got there, then a certain tribe said, okay, we're going to host in 4 years. And so for whatever reason, it was 4 years. So then there was the next journey, and maybe there was like, you know, 30 some canoes. Well, then it started being every year, every single year. And there just was a few more canoes when it was at Suquamish. Suquamish wanted to host when it was 20 years after 1989. So 2009 was a big deal for us. And a lot of things changed. Remember, when they were sending me in a tribal car down to Olympia in 85, 86, 87, when they were doing that, it was like, there was like 3 tribal cars. And I would get one of them to go to those meetings. Well, now we got a fleet, you know, we got fleets of trucks and cars and all that. And we have multiple businesses and multiple buildings and campuses. We are the first tribe in the state of Washington to have a school district, to own and operate a school district, not just a grade school, not just a high school, but a school district. And here's what I have to say about canoe journeys. It's not just that there was more canoes and more paddles and more pullers. To get in that canoe that first year when Nigel was 14 years old, there was sleeping bags and tents, paddles, but we didn't have any songs. We didn't have any songs to sing, drums to drum, and so going to those where they did stop at a tribal village, there would be singing and dancing and different tribes presenting and gift giving and all that. And we were not prepared for that in 1993. We were barely prepared to send one canoe full of just a skeleton crew and one van up there. But after that happened, and then the next year and the next year, we started concentrating on what else is needed. Cedar bark hats, more canoe paddles than you imagine, because weather happens and canoes tip and you lose a paddle or two or whatever, or a walrus takes one. We've got walrus, sea lion, I guess, will just come and take a paddle. They'll bite it and they go ahead and try to hang on. When a sea lion bites the canoe paddle, just go ahead and try to hang on to it. And they look all cute and everything, all blubbery, laying on a float, sunbathing. But when they come to you and grab your paddle with their teeth, they're powerful. So, so more songs, more dances, more cedar bark capes and cedar bark skirts and cedar bark headbands and cedar bark hats. I have a hat here. Before Canoe Journeys, I saw 1 or 2 of these in museum exhibits. Now I've made 17 of these, you know. I can make one in a day, but I'd rather take the whole weekend. And when I got married, the first time, we'll not talk about how many times I've been married and divorced, but when I got married the first time, I got married in a cedar bark cape. And that was 1984. And I made the cedar bark cape, and Eddie Carrier was teaching me how to pull the bark, how to soak the bark, how to beat the bark, and how to weave the bark. And then my cousin Peg put red fox fur on the collar and shells all on the back in a design. Now, many people have cedar bark capes and skirts. We also wore dog wool blankets and dog wool dresses and all that. So now we have dozens of people who now know how to weave cedar and weave wool. And I have like 6 looms at my house for wool weaving. Language, we have when I was growing up, I could say a dozen different words, but they were just one word, like Hoyt is by, and Kaya is grandma, and Sapa is grandpa, Pish Pish is cat, you know, just individual words. Nigel's firstborn daughter, when she was Chief Seattle Days Princess, she did her whole speech in Lushootseed in our language. So all this is to say that what started out as the state's 100th birthday and became Canoe Journeys, which started in the Maritime Museum, but I told you there was a committee called Lasting Legacy. This should have been the Lasting Legacy, because it's still giving, and still giving. And it's all the Canoe nations, whether you're in what's now called Washington State or British Columbia or Alaska, even Oregon tribes with canoes. We've had Hawaiian people come over with their canoes, and Maori people come up with their canoes. So so it's a big thing. This what came, the unintended consequences aren't always bad things. The unintended consequences of the state's 100th birthday and of this little wannabe radical militant saying, what about the tribes, is Canoe Journeys. And Canoe Journeys, so if somebody was writing a grant for a canoe journey, they would say, it's impossible, there's not enough money. There's not enough money to do this. And who's gonna fund it? It's everything, it's transportation, it's food, it's tents and summer clothing, and you know, what's that stuff called that wicks your sweat away but stays dry, and there's all this fancy gear. And I mean, REI should really love us. And but it's also an anti-drug, anti-alcohol, anti-domestic violence, anti-cancer, anti-obesity, anti-diabetes, pro-health, pro-culture, pro-language, pro-physical activity and culture, and program that was never written a grant for and never funded. That's still giving. It's still giving language and songs and dances and pride and pride. I have a picture that I so bad wanted to show you of Nigel when he was 14 years old, carrying the Suquamish sign into Bella Bella. And then us hosting in 2009, when, so 20 years of canoe journeys, when there was, 100 canoes at the Suquamish waterfront. 100 canoes. So if you go into the Safeway in Paulsbo and look over where the stairs come up, that, if you park downstairs, there's a huge giant image of that waterfront and those 100 canoes. It's that day, that moment when all the canoes were rafted up together and waiting for protocol to come up on the beach. Now, there's, it's been a while. All of my kids and all of my grandkids have been on canoe journey, whole journeys. Most of my grandkids have been on every canoe journey in their life. Like that granddaughter, my firstborn granddaughter, who's now 25, she's been on every canoe journey in her whole entire life, even after she became a mom. All of my kids are pullers. 2 of my kids are skippers. And I was in at the very beginning when I was saying, if you want to do a reenactment, we need access to old growth. Well, we also care about sustainability. And so at a certain point, even we can't keep cutting down old growth for canoes. So there's however many now that are fiberglass, that are shaped on the traditional style, and there's some that are now I forgot, veneer, where they're layers and layers and layers of planks and not a dugout, and they're shaped perfectly and beautifully. But every year there's paddle making and hat making and cedar skirt making and on, and it just goes on and on and on. All the things that we do to get ready for canoe journey. And of course, these last couple of years, we haven't. When I, at the very last journey that happened was to Lummi, I had been in practices. I went to the cold water training. I went to the practices with 3 different skippers. And then before the journey, I asked and I had been going to the fitness center. Our tribe has a fitness center. I've been going every day at 5 in the morning. And I asked both of my sons, who are skippers, do you think I would be an asset or burden if I chose to go on the canoe journey as a puller? And both of them said, you would be an asset. And so then I went to the committee and I said, I don't know if you have an application process, but I would like to be a puller. And I know that the committee pays, you're taken care of. They have the tents, they have, they have the cots, they have whatever you need. And I said I could earn my keep by telling stories. They know I'm a storyteller. I said I could tell stories in the evening around the fire or whatever. And they said, you already earned it a long time ago, back with the Centennial. So I was a puller on the last journey that happened from beginning to end. And for the first time ever, from way back when I was a wannabe radical militant, and hadn't gotten in a canoe until this, well, I guess it was 3 years ago when we pulled to Lummi. And yeah.
Barbara, you're incredible. This is such an amazing story. And you know what? If you would be willing to come back sometime when maybe we can help even with getting all those pictures and stuff involved, because this is a story that so many people would find. I mean, I'm just sitting here laughing and crying with you because it's such an amazing, human, incredible journey story. And we would love to hear more. But yeah, we want more, Barbara. And I am aware you're going to come and join us again next month, and we're so grateful for that. But what a treasure. Thank you.